For as long as I've known Alex, something about them has always seemed a little off. Not in the way you'd pick up on immediately. No one else seemed to notice. They laughed in all the right places, fit into conversation seamlessly, and somehow managed to be the most effortlessly charming person in our program. We met on the first day of university studying an anthropology program. Two awkward teens thrown together by chance, drawn to each other by a shared love for ancient civilizations and a mutual wariness of dorm life. Over the years, we became inseparable. But there was something deeper beneath the surface. Something I hadn't quite grasped until recently. An oddity I couldn't name, lingering in the space between us. At first, I chalked it up to Alex being eccentric, a product of spending too many sleepless nights deep in thought, poring over archaic texts and forgotten myths. That's the kind of person they were, constantly on edge of the strange and the unknown. We all were to some degree. Anthropology students thrive on the unfamiliar, the alien. Yet Alex seemed to take it further, like they were peering not just into other cultures, but into something else. Something that felt dangerously close. I can't say when the unease truly began. Maybe it was the time we were walking home late from the library, and Alex casually mentioned the name of a god I'd never heard of, speaking about it like it was an old acquaintance. Or maybe it was the way they sometimes looked at me. Just a little too long. As if weighing me, measuring something about me I wasn't even aware of. I ignored it for years, burying those doubts under layers of shared experiences, laughs, and late-night debates over the origins of human behavior. But then, a few weeks ago, I found something. Something that changed everything. What I discovered about Alex, about who or what they really were, made me question everything I knew. Not just about them, but about the world itself. And now I can't help but wonder if I ever truly knew them at all. The invitation to the camping trip came up one evening over beers. Our group huddled close together in the back corner of a dimly lit bar. It was supposed to be a celebration, a way to mark the end of our course, a final hurrah before we all went our separate ways. Sarah was the first to suggest it, with that excited gleam in her eye she always got when talking about adventure.
How about northeastern Arizona? We could camp out near Roof Butte, under the stars. It's isolated, quiet, perfect.
Everyone seemed on board immediately. Tyler started rattling off plans about who would bring what, and Sarah pulled up pictures on her phone, showing us sprawling red cliffs, wide open skies, and that looming shadowy outline of the mountain in the distance. I'd never really been much of a camper, but even I had to admit it sounded perfect. We could use the break. The weeks of stress and thesis deadlines had been brutal. But as soon as Roof Butte was mentioned, Alex's expression changed. Subtle at first, a slight tensing in the jaw, a quick dart of the eyes towards the door. It wasn't until Sarah started describing the place in more detail that Alex's discomfort became undeniable. They leaned back in their chair, arms crossed tightly over their chest as though pulling inward.
I don't know,
Alex said after a pause, her voice oddly strained.
There are better places we could go. Somewhere north, maybe? Montana? Oregon? There's some more wilderness up there, more remote. Arizona's too dry, too hot.
We all glanced at each other. Alex was usually the first one in line for anything that involved the outdoors. They loved the wild, the ancient landscapes, places steeped in history and myth. Their sudden hesitation felt out of character. Sarah, always the diplomat, tried to smooth things over.
It's not going to be that hot this time of year. And Roof Butte has a history, you know? There's a lot of indigenous lore surrounding the area. I thought you'd be into that, Alex.
Alex's agitation only grew. I am, but not there. Trust me, I've read about that area. There are better places. Their words were hurried, as if trying to close the conversation before it went any further. Tyler, ever obvious, chuckled and waved a dismissive hand. Come on, Alex, don't be weird about this. You've dragged us all over Europe chasing your thesis, and now you're freaked out about some mountains in Arizona? Alex's gaze sharpened for a moment, as if contemplating something, and for the briefest second I thought they might snap back. But instead, they exhaled slowly and forced a tight smile. I just think we should consider other options, they said, softer this time, almost pleading. Somewhere a little farther away. I didn't miss the way their eyes flickered toward me, as though they were trying to communicate something silently, a warning I wasn't meant to understand yet. But the rest of the group seemed unmoved. Sarah shrugged.
Well, we've already talked to the rangers about it. It's set. Arizona it is.
Alex's smile faltered entirely. They nodded, resigned, but I could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their fingers tapped nervously against the edge of their beer glass. They weren't just uncomfortable. They were scared. I tried to catch their eye, to ask silently what was wrong, but they wouldn't look at me. They just stared down at their drink, the same distant look creeping back into their eyes. Later that night, as we walked home, I finally asked, "What's with the sudden change of heart about Arizona?" Alex kept their eyes forward, the streetlights casting long shadows across their face. For a moment, I thought they wouldn't answer. But then they spoke, voice low and guarded. There are things in that place. Things that don't belong. What things? And they didn't answer right away. Instead, they stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and turned to me. The intensity of their gaze sent a chill down my spine. You don't know what it's like there. Not really. People think they understand places like that. Old places. Ancient places. But they don't. Roof Butte, it's different. Just promise me. They added, their tone almost desperate now. Just promise me when we go, don't wander off alone. Stay close to the group, no matter what. I nodded, more out of confusion than agreement, and walked in silence the rest of the way. But Alex's words echoed in my mind, unsettling me in ways I didn't understand yet. I had no idea what lay ahead of us, but Alex seemed to. And I was starting to wonder just how much they knew, and how much they'd been hiding all these years. The car ride started off light, full of laughter and the buzz of excitement that only comes with the promise of freedom and wilderness. We packed into Tyler's beat-up SUV, a mix of hiking gear and camping supplies crammed into every available space. Alex sat up front, Sarah next to me in the back, and as usual, it didn't take long for Alex to slip into their usual party trick, doing fun voices. Alex had always been freakishly good at it. Freakishly too good, if I'm being honest. Their talent with accents and mimicking voices was the kind of thing that got us all through the long nights in the library and sleepless study sessions. No one could pull off a flawless British accent 1 second, then pivot to some obscure bird call the next, quite like Alex. It was kind of an eerie gift, really. They didn't just mimic sounds, they became them. The exact tone, the exact rhythm, as if the voice they were imitating had slipped inside them. By the time we hit the highway, Sarah had already goaded them into doing lines from The Godfather.
Come on, Alex, just one more time, Sarah nudged. I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
Alex grinned and rolled their shoulders, dropping into a voice so deep and gravelly that it made the rest of us crack up instantly.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
They repeated, this time slower, more menacing, perfectly in character. Tyler banged his hand on the steering wheel. Seriously, man, you should have been an actor.
Oh, please,
Alex said, slipping into a Scottish brogue without missing a beat.
Ain't no room for me on the silver screen, laddie.
It was contagious. The laughter, the ease. Alex kept switching it up, moving through one impression after another. Celebrities, famous movie lines, even our professors from university. At one point, they perfectly mimicked Dr. Halverson's nasally drawl, reciting one of his old anthropology lectures word for word. We all burst out laughing at that one. Even I had to admit, despite everything swirling in the back of my mind, Alex's ability to copy voices like that was pure magic. But somewhere along the way, between the accents and impressions, a strange feeling crept in, just beneath the surface. Maybe it was because I was thinking about our conversation the night before, or maybe it was the way Alex's voice never seemed to falter, never slipped. They could switch accents, personalities, even pitches with an almost unnatural precision, like a chameleon of sound. And the more they did, the more I realized how effortless it was for them. Too effortless. I'd always admired their skill, but now I couldn't help but feel a little unsettled. It was as if Alex wasn't just imitating the voices, or slipping in and out of them like someone trying on different masks, each one fitting a little too perfectly. I caught Sarah's eye in the rearview mirror as she doubled over in laughter at one of Alex's impressions. She didn't notice it. Neither did Tyler. But I did. I saw how Alex's eyes flicked towards me every now and then, how their smile never quite reached their eyes. Like they were playing along with the jokes, but their mind was somewhere else entirely. And then, right as we were pulling off the highway towards the dirt road that would lead us into the mountains, Alex went quiet. The sudden absence of their voice left a weird silence in the car, the kind that feels too loud. It was as if they'd slipped out of the role mid-scene, like a light had been switched off inside of them.
What's wrong?
Sarah asked, noticing the shift. Alex cleared their throat and forced a chuckle. Nothing. Just thinking. But I saw it again. That tension. The same way they look in the bar when Ruth Butte was mentioned. That creeping fear like they could hear something we couldn't. I didn't press them. Not then, anyway. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever game Alex had been playing during the car ride, the real performance had yet to begin. Thinking back on it now, I realized we'd all wondered about Alex's heritage at some point. It was one of those things that felt like an unspoken mystery among our group, something none of us dared to ask outright but couldn't help but speculate about. I remember how people would occasionally ask in passing if Alex was native. Maybe it was something about their features, the way they carried themselves, or the strange familiarity they seemed to have with ancient stories and landscapes that had deep cultural significance. But every time someone brought it up, Alex would deflect, effortlessly steering the conversation elsewhere, like they were dodging a question they didn't want to answer. Tyler, who's Blackfoot, had mentioned it once. Not to Alex, but to me. We were on a hike, one of those quiet moments where the rest of the group had wandered ahead, leaving the two of us trailing behind. We'd been talking about ancestry, family roots. Tyler had shared some stories from his Blackfoot upbringing, about the traditions his grandparents passed down. And then, almost casually, he turned to me and said, "You think Alex is Navajo?" I remember pausing, considering it. "I don't know," I'd replied. "He never talks about it." Tyler had just nodded, his eyes distant as we walked. He's gotta be. I mean, the way he moves, the way he knows things, all the things. It's like it's in his blood. You can see it. He's always known more than he lets on. The way he talks about places, like he's been there before, like he belongs there. Especially things like the southern tribes. He wasn't wrong. Alex did have that air about them. Like they knew more than the rest of us. But not in a way that was boastful or arrogant. It was quieter than that. More reserved. Almost like they were keeping a secret they didn't want anyone to discover. And every time Tyler or Sarah or anyone else in the group had asked Alex directly about where their family came from, they'd always brush it off with a joke or a story, leaving us no closer to an answer than before. Looking back, I can see how much we took it for granted. Alex's unwillingness to talk about themselves. It wasn't like we didn't notice. We just assumed it wasn't our place to pry. After all, we all had our own stuff, our own histories. It felt rude to push. But now, as I pieced things together in my head, I realized how deliberate Alex's silence had been. Like they were hiding something much bigger than a simple family background. Something that had to stay buried. And as we wound our way closer to Roof Butte, with the jagged silhouette of the mountain looming in the distance, I couldn't help but wonder what if that secret, the one Alex had been dodging for years, was tied to this place. Maybe that's why they'd been so uneasy about coming here. Maybe Tyler was right all along. Maybe Alex was Navajo. And there was something about Roof Butte, something ancient and dangerous that had been haunting them all this time. I glanced over at Alex, their face now drawn and silent as they stared out the window. Whatever they were thinking, it was locked deep inside, far out of reach. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon when we pulled into the trailhead parking lot. The sky was a dusty blend of oranges and purples. The air still warm, but with a coolness creeping in as evening settled over the mountains. Tyler cut the engine, and we all spilled out of the car, groaning and stretching after the long drive. The smell of the desert hit me immediately. Dry sagebrush and dust mingled with the faintest hint of pine carried on the breeze from the higher altitudes. We busied ourselves unloading the gear, chatting about nothing in particular. Sarah and Tyler were already discussing the best route up to our campsite, a flat patch of land Tyler had scoped out online. I stayed quiet, glancing toward Alex, who stood by the car, arms crossed, staring out into the scrubland. Something in their posture had me uneasy. That same tension from the car ride still coiled in their shoulders. I followed their gaze to see what had caught their attention. About 30 feet away, nestled in the sparse brush, was a coyote, stood watching us. It didn't move or flinch, just stared with unnerving stillness, its eyes locked onto us with a confidence that sent a shiver down my spine. It didn't seem afraid or curious like I'd expect from a wild animal. It seemed aware. "Hey, Alex," Sarah called, her voice casual, as she noticed the coyote too. "Think we should be worried about that one?" Tyler laughed as he lifted his backpack from the car. "Nah, coyotes don't bother people. They're just scavengers. Probably more scared of us than we are of them." Alex, however, didn't laugh. They didn't even move at first, still staring at the animal like there was something they weren't saying. Before I could ask what was on their mind, another coyote slipped out from behind a clump of shrubs. Then another, and another. Within seconds, 5 more coyotes emerged from the surrounding brush, all moving with the same quiet, eerie confidence. They didn't snarl or pace or do anything the wild animals usually do. They just stood there, perfectly still, watching us with a kind of calm that made my skin prickle.
Sarah's smile faded as she glanced back at the rest of us. Okay, maybe this is a little weird, she admitted. Should we be concerned now? Tyler opened his mouth to respond, but Alex beat him to it, their voice low and measured. Maybe elsewhere, they said, quietly, eyes still on the coyotes. But be careful around those ones. Sarah frowned. What do you mean, those ones? Alex finally tore their gaze away from the coyotes and turned back to the group, their expression unreadable. Just don't make any sudden moves. Don't give them a reason to follow us. Tyler snorted, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. Dude, they're coyotes, not wolves. Not gonna follow us. But something in Alex's tone, something in the way they looked at the coyotes, kept the rest of us from brushing it off. Even Sarah, usually the most fearless one of us all, gave the animals a wide berth. She grabbed her pack and started up on the trail. I lingered for a moment, watching the coyotes as they continued to stand there, silent and still. Their eyes followed us, tracking our movements, but they didn't move a muscle. It was only when Alex fell into step beside me that I turned and started walking too. We hiked in near silence for the first mile, the weight of the pack on my shoulders grounding me as we made our way toward the campsite. But my thoughts kept drifting back to those coyotes, to the way Alex had reacted, and to the subtle warning in their words. I wanted to ask Alex more, to dig into why they seemed so uneasy. But something told me now wasn't the right time. We're just beginning this journey, and already the air felt heavy, like there was something waiting for us ahead. Something Alex knew but wasn't ready to say. The hike passed without any major issues, though the strange encounter with the coyotes seemed to cast a quiet shadow over the group. Conversations that had been full of energy earlier were now reduced to murmured comments about the trail or the weather, and even Tyler, who was usually the loudest amongst us, seemed more focused on the path ahead than cracking jokes. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it carried a weight to it, a shared sense of unease that no one wanted to acknowledge out loud. When we finally arrived at the clearing Tyler had chosen, the sun was dipping low, casting long golden rays across the red rocks and shrubland around us. We quickly set up camp, the familiar rhythm of pitching tents and unloading gear helping to shake off some of the tension. Soon we had a fire going, the crackle of flames a welcome distraction from the heavy atmosphere that had followed us since the parking lot. But Alex was still distant. They sat a little further from the fire than the rest of us, staring into the flames as if lost in thought. Even when Sarah and Tyler tried to engage them, offering jokes, teasing about their earlier impressions in the car, Alex just gave half-hearted smiles, never quite meeting anyone's eyes. It was unsettling, seeing them like this. Alex had always been the steady one in our group, the one who could shift the mood with a joke or a clever insight. But tonight they seemed like a ghost of themselves, present in body but far away in their mind. After a while, when Tyler and Sarah were distracted with their own conversation, I scooted closer to Alex, lowering my voice. Hey, what's going on? You've been off since we got here. Is it about the coyotes? Or is it something else? For a long moment, Alex didn't respond. They just kept staring into the fire, their face illuminated by the flickering orange light. I was about to press further when they finally looked up at me, and the sadness in their eyes hit me like a physical blow. It's not the coyotes, Alex said softly, shaking their head. It's just... coming down here reminds me of things I'd rather forget. Reminds me that no matter how hard I try, no matter what I do, I'll never be good enough. The vulnerability in their voice startled me.
Alex had never spoken like this before, never hinted at any kind of self-doubt. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, Sarah cut across from the fire.
"It's not true, Alex. You're one of the smartest people I know," she said, her voice full of warmth. "I mean, seriously, you've practically carried all of us through the last few years. You're great, you know that, right?"
"Yeah, man," Tyler added, throwing a small log onto the fire with a thud. "You're always pushing yourself harder than anyone. You've got more going for you than most people ever will." Alex gave them both a tired smile, but it still didn't reach their eyes. "Thanks," they murmured, their eyes falling back to the flames. "I appreciate it. I do. But it's not about school or work or any of that. It's deeper." I wanted to ask more. Deeper how? What was it about this place, this trip, that had brought all of this to the surface? But before I could, Alex sighed, standing up and brushing the dirt off their jeans. "I think I'm going to call it a night," they said quietly, their voice flat. "It's been a long day. We've got a big hike ahead of us tomorrow." Sarah and Tyler exchanged glances but didn't argue. "Sure," Sarah said, her tone gentler. "We'll be up for a while, so just yell if you need anything." Alex nodded, but their eyes lingered on mine for a moment, as if they wanted to say something more. Then, with another sigh, they turned and headed to their tent, leaving me sitting by the fire with a head full of questions. I stared after them, the soft sound of the tent zipper closing, the only noise breaking the night. What had they meant by never being good enough? And why did this place, this stretch of desert and mountain in the middle of nowhere, bring such a deep sadness to them? I wanted to follow, to push for answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was the exhaustion in Alex's voice, or the sadness that seemed to cling to them like a shadow. Or maybe it was the look in their eyes, the one that said they were carrying something too heavy to share just yet. Whatever it was, I knew there was more to this trip than any of us realized, more to Alex than any of us have ever understood. As the fire crackled and the stars began to fill the sky, I settled back against my pack, my mind racing with all the unspoken things hanging in the air. We'd all come here for a break, for adventure, for closure after years of hard work, but now, sitting there in the glowing darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger than any of us was waiting out there, just beyond the firelight. The fire had burned down to embers by the time everyone else had retired to their tents. Tyler and Sarah went first, laughing quietly as they stumbled off into the darkness, their voices muffled by the canvas as soon as they zipped up. I stayed by the fire, watching the flames die down, letting the quiet wrap around me like a blanket. The others were right. We had a long hike ahead tomorrow, but something about the open sky, the cold desert air, and the way the stars stretched out endlessly above us kept me from moving. Before I knew it, my eyes grew heavy, and I must have drifted off, slumped against my pack beneath the open sky. It was the kind of sleep where you don't fully realize you've fallen under until something pulls you out of it. Slow at first, like a gentle tug. Then sharper, more insistent. The feeling of being watched. I blinked myself awake, my mind fuzzy and disoriented. The embers of the fire glowed faintly, casting the campsite in an eerie dim light. For a second, everything seemed normal. Just the rustle of the wind through the scrub, the distant hum of insects, and the deep quiet of the wilderness. But then I felt it again. The unmistakable sensation that someone or something was watching me. I sat up slowly, my eyes scanning the edges of the camp. That's when I saw it,
just at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows of the sagebrush. A coyote's head. At first, I just thought it was one of the same coyotes from earlier, returning to observe us from a distance. But something wasn't right. The head was wrong. It wasn't at ground level, where a coyote's head should be. It was 5 feet in the air, suspended above the bushes. And it was upside down. My heart stuttered in my chest. The coyote's head just hung there, eerily still, its yellow eyes fixated on me. Its lips didn't curl, and there was no growl, just an intense, unnatural stillness like it was waiting for something. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My body felt locked, rooted to the spot by the sheer wrongness of what I was seeing. Then, without a sound, the head moved. A creature stepped out from behind the sagebrush, its movements jerky and stilted, like a marionette controlled by an unseen hand. As it emerged, the rest of its body came into view, and I felt the bottom of my stomach fall out. It wasn't a coyote, at least not fully. The creature was tall, too tall, and its limbs were grotesquely elongated. Its forelimbs were wrong. Instead of paws, human hands sprouted from the ends, gripping the air as if struggling to maintain balance. Its chest was covered in sparse dark feathers, like those of some kind of twisted raven, but the rest of its body, it had the torso of a man, pale and warped, but its legs bent the wrong direction, like a dog's hind legs fused onto the figure of a man. The joints jutted out unnaturally, and its spine twisted with each movement, sending shivers down my own. The worst part was the face. Still the head of a coyote, but perched upside down atop its long neck, staring at me with that same cold yellow gaze. The skin around its eyes was pulled tight, and its mouth hung open in an unnatural grimace, showing far too many teeth, even for a coyote. It took a startled step toward me, its limbs juddering unnervingly, like it wasn't used to moving in this form. Each step felt like it was battling against itself, each movement an abomination of twisted anatomy. I wanted to scream, to scramble away, but I was paralyzed by fear so deep it felt like my body had betrayed me. The creature took another step, then another. Its upside-down head never broke eye contact, never blinked. I couldn't move. Couldn't even breathe properly. The only sound in the world was the faint crackle of dying embers and the uneven shuffling of the thing's 2 long limbs as it approached. I tried to convince myself that I was dreaming, that this was some terrible sleep-induced nightmare brought on by the day's stress, but the cold sweat beating onto my skin, the sharp bite of the desert air in my lungs, it all felt too real. The creature's movements grew slower as it neared, like it was savoring the terror radiating from me. Then, when it was only a few feet away, it stopped, its head cocked to the side, jerking at an odd angle as if assessing me, the way a predator might study its prey before striking. The world around me seemed to shrink, the fire barely more than a glow. It was just me and this thing now. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, but still I couldn't tear my eyes away. The creature leaned forward, and in a voice that was neither human nor animal, it whispered something I couldn't understand. And then, slowly, impossibly, it smiled. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But all I could do was sit there, frozen as the creature's 2 human hands reached out toward me. Before the creature could reach me, Alex appeared out of nowhere,
stepping between us like they had been there the whole time. My heart, already racing, skipped a beat. But this wasn't the Alex I knew. There was something different. Something wrong. They moved with a strange purpose, stepping right up to the grotesque, twisted coyote thing without a hint of fear. Alex placed a hand on its chest, and the creature froze, letting out a low, guttural growl, its yellow eyes narrowing with irritation. They started speaking. Alex's voice soft and measured, but the words were in a language I'd never heard before, harsh and guttural, like the wind scraping across rock, layered with tones that seemed to vibrate in the air. The coyote-headed creature grumbled back, its voice deep and twisted, full of impatience. They were having a conversation, if you could call it that. And the longer it went on, the more agitated the creature seemed to become, shifting uneasily on its two long legs. That's when Alex changed. At first it was subtle. A slight elongation of their limbs, their posture growing straighter. But then, in an instant, they started to stretch, their body warping into something inhuman, their frame expanding, towering over the other creature, until Alex was impossibly tall, their proportions exaggerated in a way that didn't make any sense. Their arms hung longer than they should, their fingers tapering off into shapes that weren't quite human. Their face became a distorted, unreadable blur, the features stretching and bending into something I could barely recognize. I still wanted to scream. I still wanted to get up and run, but I couldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, trapped in some nightmarish scene that was far beyond anything I could comprehend. My heart pounded in my chest, but all I could do was watch in a horrified silence and observe. The coyote-headed creature, which had been so terrifying only moments before, now looked small and uncertain in comparison to the thing Alex had become. It took a step back, its yellow eyes flickering nervously between Alex and me. It muttered something under its breath, a sound that was almost a complaint, but its gaze lingered on me as if wanting one last piece of me before retreating. Then Alex, if you could still call them that, turned their head toward me. Their face, now a shifting, nightmarish mask of stretched skin and shadows, was impossible to read. But somehow, I felt their gaze pierce straight through me. A tear, just one, rolled down their now grotesque cheek, cutting a path through the shifting, dark mass on their features. In a voice that was no longer singular, but a chorus of overlapping tones, some deep and monstrous, others familiar and soft, Alex spoke. I tried so hard to fit in, they said, the words resonating in the air like 100 voices layered over one another. The sadness in them was overwhelming, suffocating, as if those simple words carried the weight of everything Alex had been hiding all these years. The creature Alex had become inhaled deeply, their distorted chest rising with the breath. I thought this time it would work, they continued, words echoing with a finality that made my skin crawl. Remember me, kid. And just like that, they both turned away. Alex's towering, warped form and the creature with the upside-down coyote head disappearing into the desert, as if the night itself swallowed them whole. I sat there frozen, still staring into the empty space where they had been just moments before. My heart hammered against my ribs, my breath shallow and panicked, but I still couldn't move. I couldn't process what I'd seen, what Alex had become, what they had
always been. The fire crackled faintly beside me, a ghost of the warmth it had once provided, but it felt cold, colder than I'd ever felt in my life. Alex was gone, and I wasn't sure I'd ever see them again. But their last words echoed in my mind, as clear as if they were whispered directly into my ear. Remember me.